Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Brian's Horror Corner, and welcome to this horror movie review as part of my summer horror movie series for July here. Um, Today, we're going to take a look at a late '90s slasher, um, sort of the poor man's scream, if you will, from 1997, and that is "I Know What You Did Last Summer," the original from 1997 that I have here on Blu-ray. So yeah, I know what you did last summer. Let's just go ahead and get into it, starting with the setup, the premise, and the cast, and then I'll get into my thoughts and review, which will be spoiler free as much as possible. So, I know what you did last summer is a 1997 American slasher film directed by Jim Gillespie and written by Kevin Williamson, who wrote Scream as well, of course. It is loosely based on a 1973 novel of the same name by Lois Duncan. It's the first installment in the I Know What You Did Last Summer franchise. The film centers on four young friends who are stalked by a hook wielding killer 1 year after covering up a car accident in which they killed a man. The film also draws inspiration from the urban legend known as The Hook and the 80s slasher films Prom Night, The House on Sorority Row. So basically, the film opens on July 4th, 1996, in Southport, North Carolina. Julie James and her friends Ray Bronson, Helen Shivers, and Barry Cox drive to the beach. While driving along a coastal byway, they accidentally hit a pedestrian. Julie's friend Max passes by them on the road. Julie reassures Max of their well being and he leaves. The group decides to dump the body in the water, but the pedestrian wakes up and attacks Helen. She struggles and he falls into the water. The group flees the docks and swears to never discuss what happened. A year later, in 1997, Julie returns home from college for the summer. The friends have gone their separate ways. Julie receives a letter with no return address stating, I know what you did last summer. Julie tracks down Helen and they take the note to Barry, who suspects Max. They confront Max on the docks and Barry threatens him with a hook. Julie meets Ray, who now works as a fisherman. Later, Max is killed by a figure in a rain slicker wielding a hook. Later that night, Barry discovers a picture of his car in his gym locker saying, I know, on the back of it. He is then ambushed by the same assailant, stealing and driving his car. So that's sort of the setup and the premise, what gets you into the movie. As far as the cast goes, we have Jennifer Love Hewitt as Julie James, Sarah Michelle Gellar as Helen Shivers, Ryan Phillippe as Barry Cox, Freddie Prinze Jr. as Ray Bronson, Bridget Wilson as Elsa Shivers, Anne Heche as Melissa Missy Egan, Muse Watson as Ben Willis, the fisherman, Johnny Galecki as Max Newrick, and Stuart Greer as the officer. So yeah, that's the setup, the premise, and the cast for I Know What You Did Last Summer from 1997. So before I get into my review, just a little FYI, a little backstory. Um, I really grew up during this time as far like I was basically the same age as the characters, especially Jennifer Love Hewitt. She's actually 2 months younger than me. She was born in February of '79. I was born in December of '78. And these guys are a little bit older than I am by a few years, but basically it's kind of my wheelhouse. So I remember these movies well from Scream all the way through to like 2000. A lot of these, whether they be slashers or just like teen movies that came out during that time, because I could really relate to them. The reason my big crush is in this movie, basically, and that's right here, Jennifer Love Hewitt. I was pretty much obsessed with her from about 1997 through about 2005 or so, 7 or 8 years there, where I just thought she was the best thing ever put on earth, basically. So I mean, even now, I think she's beautiful, but obviously she's older now, and I don't see her in as much anymore. But during that time, late '90s to around 2000, she was definitely my Hollywood crush, if you will. So that's sort of a precursor to discussing this movie. I was a really big fan of hers. Um, where was I going with this? But no, it's really more just that this was sort of my wheelhouse in terms of when these movies came out and stuff, and a lot of the performers were about my same age. So I just wanted to throw that out there before I get into it. So I know what you did last summer is not a great slasher movie. It really isn't, but it is a fun, highly rewatchable, entertaining slasher movie, especially for the time that it came out. So let's just get into my review, starting with my pros or the things I like about the movie. And I think you have to start with the story. Unlike a lot of slashers, especially from those of the 80s and even those since in the 2000s, in this movie, the story is really interesting, and they actually invested in the story, and thus where Kevin Williamson's writing comes in, who, of course, he actually wrote this before, or adapted this, I should say, from the novel as a screenplay even before he did Scream, but nobody wanted to touch this until, of course, that Scream came out and was successful, and then everybody wanted to know more about this script. So yeah, you can tell Kevin Williamson has his handwriting on this story here. I just think it's a very interesting story, the way things unfold. It has a good mystery aspect to it, especially the first time you watch it throughout the middle of the movie. There's multiple red herrings, which I think are set up pretty decently. It worked pretty well overall. Yeah, Kevin Williams' involvement is definitely big in this movie when it relates to the story. And yeah, it's definitely a pro because, as I said, a lot of slashers aren't really known for their premise or their story. There's not a lot of depth to a lot of the slasher movies, especially those in like the early 80s, let's say, and even some in the later 2000s. So that's one thing that definitely stands out in this movie. Also, I think the characters have some pretty good arc to them, a little bit more depth to the characters than we often get in a lot of slasher movies. Um, they change a lot from the beginning of the movie where they're typical teen, the typical tropey teens from, kind of the bitchy, high on herself character. I don't really know what he's definitely an arrogant prick. He's more like the everyman, and she's sort of the I don't know if you want to say virgin, but sort of the more innocent kind of girl. Um, but that's all kind of thrown on their head when this incident happens in the first 25 minutes of the movie. And then it's a year later, and we all kind of discover where they've been and stuff. And I think there's a pretty good arc there. They're definitely in a different place throughout the rest of this movie than they are at the beginning. Especially her, I would say, and her to a certain extent. Him as well. I mean, really all of them. The only difference is he's still kind of a dick that's trying to pretend none of it happened. They didn't do anything wrong, and he's kind of the jock with all the money kind of thing. But as far as characters go, especially for a slasher, once again, it definitely stands out in terms of character depth and the fact that there's an arc with most of them throughout the movie, and it definitely helps make them more of an engaging group of characters and makes it a more engaging movies, kind of a character study on whether or not we're sympathetic to them. Because at first we're not sympathetic when they decide to do what they do. But as the movie goes on, I think we gain a little bit more sympathy for them. At least I did, and that comes across pretty well in the movie. So again, Kevin Williamson gets credit for writing the characters here. I think the performances in the movie are pretty decent as well. Again, comparing it to other slasher movies, you're not going to compare it to Silence of the Lambs or anything or any sort of Oscar-worthy movies, but for a slasher genre, I thought the performances are pretty good. Especially Sarah Michelle Gellar and Ryan Phillippe. I think those two are the best of the four here. I think Jennifer Love Hewitt. I realize that she's not the best actress in the world, and I'm kind of biased with her because I had a huge crush on her for like almost a decade, and it's more because of her beauty and stuff. But her sex appeal, but I don't think she's the worst actress in the world. I think she's just kind of okay. I think she's just kind of a middle of the road, decent to above average in some movies actress. I think she's decent in this movie. But Sarah Michelle Gellar, I thought she really in this most recent watch I had, I thought she really stood out the most, and Ryan Phillippe too, even though he's kind of a douchebag in this movie. I think he does it really well and is believable. I like him in some other movies as well, like Cruel Intentions and Antitrust is an underrated movie that I like him in. But I think the most of them do a pretty solid job. The performances in the movie are pretty solid as slashers go. I really enjoy the great setting with this coastal town. It's definitely got a like an eastern feel to it. Northeastern, eastern seaboard kind of feel to it with the setting. We get a lot of ocean views. I like the coastal town. I like that some of it takes place on a boat. It really makes this slasher stand out a bit more than most as well. Great camera work and visual shots throughout the movie, especially the opening panning shot over the ocean, where they zoom in all the way to a character who's off on shore, basically off like a mountain cliff or something. Very very good cinematography. Very very well shot movie. Overall, it's a good looking movie actually. And then I really like and enjoy the final act and the reveal and confrontation of the movie. Like the last 20 minutes or so when things are revealed in a confrontation. So I thought that was very well done. Again, mostly because of the setting that takes place on a boat, which is kind of an isolating and having the characters to have to make some decisions kind of setting, which I enjoy. And finally, I thought the score and the music are pretty good. Very 90s, very mid to late 90s, very nostalgic, and that's probably playing more into my pro for that. But I still think it holds up pretty well. Even in this recent watch, I enjoyed some of the soundtrack to the movie as well as like the score and the cues that are used throughout the movie. I think it works pretty well. So getting into some cons, it's definitely not a perfect slasher. The movie really isn't that scary. That's the biggest con. There's a couple of atmospheric tension filled scenes, especially that last scene on the boat. But overall, it's more of a fun and interesting character study and mystery and a good story with good characters. Again, going back to the Kevin Williamson writing, than it is any kind of like really horrific or scary kind of movie. Also, I have to mention, I think Freddie Prinze Jr. is the weakest of the four main characters. His performance is really weak. Um, just very wooden and unconvincing, in my opinion. I actually think he does better. I don't know what his first movie was. I don't think this was his first movie. It might have been his first horror movie, but he does get better from other movies that I've seen him in as we get closer to 2000 and beyond. So he might have been pretty green behind the ears yet, but his performance definitely stands out, not in a good way. The kills are another thing that are pretty lackluster. There's nothing great about it. There's one kill I thought was good early on in the movie where somebody gets a hook to their chin. But other than that, it's a lot of cutaway kills. It's a lot of off camera kills. Nothing special about the kills. Um, and there's very little gore. There's a little bit of blood, but very little gore. So if you're a gore hound, you're probably not going to enjoy this slasher. The movies are rated, but it's mostly for the language. There's a lot of F bombs in the movie, but it's more of a PG-13 slasher ultimately, and especially in terms of the kills, as I was mentioning, being very PG-13, and also the fact there's not a lot of nudity in this movie. Now, it does have a lot of cleavage in this movie, but in terms of like slasher nudity, like you get back in the early 80s or even in the 2000s to a certain extent, it doesn't have any of that. So if you're looking for like an early 80s kind of slasher here and you're comparing this to it, you're probably going to be disappointed. I think it is more of a PG-13 slasher movie, other than the language, as I said, what makes it R. The characters typically, of course, make a lot of dumb decisions that make no sense, turning around when they should be running, and just the typical stuff, screaming instead of helping, those kind of things, which ultimately lead to their demise or their friend's demise. You get a lot of tropey false jump scares as well in this movie. Although I'll have to say it's not the worst I've seen. I think you get a lot more jump scares as we get into the 2000s. It's not up to that level here in 97 yet, but they're still there. And then finally, I could have done without the little hook at the very end of the movie, where it's a year later yet. So I guess it'd be 1998. And you just get a very like one last before the ending credits roll. It really just doesn't do much for it. They have to explain it away because of course there's a sequel to this movie, a couple of them. They have to sort of explain it away because the sequel came out exactly a year after this one. So yeah, that ending doesn't really hold up all that well at this point. But as I said, overall, guys, this is a fun movie that's very much a slasher of its time. I think that's the best way to say it. It's very much in the beats of Scream. It's kind of the cousin of Scream, sort of the poor man Scream, if you will. Not as bloody or gory though, and overall not quite as good or classic as iconic. I didn't mention it as well, but the killer in this movie, Ben Willis, or the Fisherman, I don't think his look is anything. I think that makes this movie a little less classic as well. There's really nothing remarkable about him. He does have a hook, which is kind of a different, unique weapon. But I'll just put that as kind of a mixed category. It's fine. I didn't mind the Rain Slicker, but it really doesn't set this movie apart, which is why when people think of slashers, this one is pretty far down the list. But yeah, it was capitalizing on the Scream franchise, just like Urban Legend did, just like Valentine did, just like the sequels to Scream did, and a lot of other movies during that time. Um, but I don't know. I like I said, this is one of the better ones. I enjoy it. I think Kevin Williamson's involvement definitely raises it to some of the other ones in terms of characters and story, and I was into the mystery of it. I wish it would have been a true R movie in terms of the kills, a little bit of nudity, even if it wasn't one of these two, although I wouldn't have minded. Um, but yeah, it's a fun movie, and I'm glad to have it in my collection. It's easily rewatchable. I can put it on, especially around the Fourth of July. It's a really good summer horror movie. So I'm going to give this a seven. I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10. I think it's a good summer horror movie. I enjoy it, partially because of biasness. I enjoy the characters, though, and the performers, and the fact that it is kind of nostalgic for me. So 7.5 out of 10. Go ahead and comment down below what you guys think of I Know What You Did Last Summer from 1997, the original. Do you like it more than I do, less than I do? Why or why not? Please like this video and hit the little notification bell down below so you don't miss any of my upcoming videos for this series. And be sure to subscribe to my channel down below so you don't miss any of my great horror content that I have coming up over the next several months and right through the end of the year, basically. So I hope you enjoyed this review. Hope everybody's doing well. Stay scared. Bye.